Today's order of service is available at the link in the chat window, as well as in the e-news. If you don't receive the e-news, you can sign up for it on the church website. We want to also remind you that recordings of our services with closed captioning are posted every Sunday afternoon on the church YouTube channel. And don't forget, we also have a live transcript of the service that's going right now. To access the transcript, click on the button next to the word live in the upper left corner of the Zoom window, and then select the view option. More detailed instructions are available in the chat. We invite you to light your own chalice at home when we come to the chalice lighting portion of the service. If you don't have a chalice, you can use a candle. And while you're thinking about chalice lightings, we're looking for members, friends, and families to record chalice lightings for worship. See your e-news for details. And speaking of families, we welcome families with children. If you'd like more information about our religious education program, please click on the link in the chat window now. We on the worship committee are making plans for our annual Thanksgiving celebration. With the pandemic, we know that our traditional cornbread communion will be a little less traditional this year. So we'd like to hear from all of you right now about whether you would be willing to come to the church on Saturday, November 21st, to collect a doggy bag of special communion cornbread that we will then enjoy together during the Sunday service. And Damien, our producer, is going to talk us through how to do this online live poll. And I certainly hope that we'll count the votes faster than they did in Pennsylvania. Just say.
Good morning. A question should appear on your screen currently. And would you be willing to drive to the church on Saturday, November 21st, to pick up cornbread communion supplies? Just use your mouse to click on the appropriate response, and then don't forget to hit submit. The poll is just going to last a couple minutes, 1 minute here. And if you do not see it, please just type it out in the chat and we'll make sure to get your votes to count as well.
Every vote will be counted. All right, and we just wanted to shout out to Sue Fazio, who's serving as our tech volunteer this morning, and to Claire Weichselbaum, who is our storyteller. Thanks to both of you. And we are once again this morning pleased to welcome our team of worship leaders from Eden Theological Seminary. Corey Lovell, Sabrina Trupia, Dee Evans, and Matthew Villarreal. Welcome. So happy that you are with us this morning. And now, since one of the most important aspects of worship is being present in community, we invite you to continue this moment of welcome by switching to gallery view and turning on your webcams to wave to each other. We're keeping everyone muted, but feel free to type your greetings in the chat, and we'll give this some time to see each other. Welcome to this religious community where we affirm the dignity and freedom of all who enter. Here we seek to live together in relationship and respect so that we may embrace and celebrate our differences. Our religious values invite us to a shared journey of truth and meaning. Sincerity and connection guide our religious community and call us into deeper association with ourselves and our world. We are glad you are part of our community this morning. And now please enjoy Hommage à Frescobaldi by Jean Langlais, performed by our organist, Earl Naylor.
Hello, my name is Corey Lovell. My pronouns are he, him, his. And in addition to being a member of First Unitarian of St. Louis, I also have the privilege of being a part of the Eden Seminarian Intern Collective, serving First as well as Elliott Chapel, Carbondale, and Abraham Lincoln congregations. Given that we have had to, a variety of ministry tasks at those other congregations, as well as then voting and watching the count this week, we were a little busy and so had to pre-record components of our service, which meant that we didn't know the results when we did that. It didn't change the intention of the message. If anything, now, knowing what we know, it has actually improved it. In some ways made it even more poignant. We have a sense of relief now. A small one, maybe knowing what lies before us, but enough. And we can use that relief in this time to turn to each other, check in with each other, and be a church family again for a moment without such an existential feeling about it. And Reverend Mr. Barb Grieve, who we were blessed to have at First for Reverend Mason's installation and ordination ceremony, had posted some opening words on Facebook that we can use, and I think really set the tone for today. It's entitled The Work of Democracy, and it's inspired by Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman's The Work of Christmas. When the glee of the progressives is stilled, when the posters in yards are removed, when the lawyers and politicians and pundits are quiet, when the protesters are safely home, the work of democracy begins. To prioritize the vulnerable, to reunite the caged children, to feed the hungry, to house the houseless, to release the prisoner, to decriminalize poverty, to provide healthcare for all, to educate the masses, to care for the earth, to protect the vote, and to let life flourish. So let us let life flourish together in community this morning by joining in worship with one another. And first, let us join in the singing of hymn 317, We Are Not Our Own.
We are not our own, river forms us, human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. We are not alone, river names us, past and present peoples near and far, family and friends and strangers, show us who we are. Therefore let us make thanksgiving, and with justice willing and aware, give to earth and all things living liturgies of care. Let us be a house of welcome, living stone upholding living stone, gladly showing all our neighbors we are not our own.
I will read aloud our chalice lighting words, and then I invite you to light your chalice or your candle along with me afterwards. Our chalice lighting words are from Erica A. Hewitt. With full hearts, we affirm our relationships with one another. We recognize our agency and our connective power. We accept our responsibility to be bold and courageous. We light this chalice, symbol of all that we are, all that we have done together, and all that we will be as our shared ministry encourages those within and beyond our walls.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Weichselbaum, she, her, hers, and I am honored to be sharing our story for all ages this morning. Some of you may know my friend Loving Bobcat and may remember that he told his very first story almost exactly 4 years ago, right after the 2016 election. And that story, Loving Bobcat and Mean Lion, was all about how Loving Bobcat and his friends in the Great Forest came together to stand up to all the mean, unfair things that Mean Lion was doing. And that story ended with Mean Lion kind of getting grumpy and frustrated that all his plans were being foiled by Loving Bobcat and his friends standing up for justice, and he ran off to go pout in a cave somewhere. So we've now got an epilogue that I just updated this morning to hear what's happened more recently in the Great Forest. So this is Loving Bobcat and Mean Lion, the epilogue. Unfortunately, as you may have guessed, the story of Loving Bobcat and Mean Lion did not actually end there. As it turns out, Mean Lion did indeed go pout in a cave somewhere, but he also continued to do very mean things. He continued to spread the hateful message that big cats were better than all the other animals. He continued telling the other animals that they had to leave the Great Forest, even though it was the only home they had ever known. He created more and more mean, unfair rules, and he added more and more other mean animals to the Forest Council to carry out his mean plans. Every time the animals of the forest thought he couldn't get any more mean, he would do something even meaner. This went on for 4 long years. Loving Bobcat and his friends continued to chant their chant, to stand up for each other day after day, month after month, year after year. Tired, discouraged, and afraid, they pressed on until finally the day came when it was time to cast their acorns into the pond to vote for the next leader of the animal kingdom. Loving Bobcat and his friends had been preparing for this day for months. They had visited all their friends and neighbors, making sure that everyone had their voting acorn ready. They had organized rides to the pond for those who needed help getting there, like Slow Sloth and Tired Tortoise. They had cleared a trail through the piles of rocks and branches that Mean Lion was trying to use to block the path to the pond in hopes that only the big cats would be able to get there. But Loving Bobcat was determined to make sure that even the tiniest ant would be able to vote. So the big day arrived, and the forest animals all flocked to the pond with their acorns. One by one, they each carefully made their mark on their acorn, took a deep breath, and threw it into the deep, swirling pond. All day long, the animals voted. Into the night, the animals voted. Loving Bobcat and his friends kept watch until every last animal in the forest had cast their acorn into the pond. And then they waited. As the election fish in the pond counted the acorns one by one, they grew more and more worried. How was Mean Lion getting so many votes? Had their efforts been for nothing? And what on earth were they going to do if Mean Lion won again? As dawn broke over the great forest, Loving Bobcat called a meeting of the animals. They gathered quietly in the clearing, exhausted and despairing. For a few moments, they all just looked around at their friends and neighbors who had been so tormented by Mean Lion over the past 4 years. And then, suddenly, they heard a shrill, piercing sound above them. "We did it! Mean Lion is defeated!" called Eagle, soaring through the trees as the sun rose in the sky. "The election fish just announced it! We won! No more Mean Lion!" There was a moment of stunned silence as all the animals stared up at him. And then, "Hurrah! We did it! No more Mean Lion! No more Mean Lion!" they cheered, hopping and scampering and swooping and leaping. They danced and they sang, their voices echoing through the forest. When the joyous pandemonium finally subsided, Loving Bobcat turned to the assembled animals and said thoughtfully, "This certainly is a day for celebration. The defeat of Mean Lion will go down in the history of the Great Forest as the beginning of a new era, a turning point, as the animal kingdom begins to embrace the worth and dignity of every creature in the land. But," he continued earnestly, "that doesn't mean our work is over." "It's not?" chirped Sparrow, landing abruptly halfway through an aerial loop-the-loop. "Well, no, I'm afraid it's really not," Loving Bobcat replied. "We may have defeated Mean Lion, but that's just the beginning. We can't expect Ernest Jaguar to magically fix everything for us. We all have to help rebuild our beloved forest." "But how?" squeaked Mouse. "The same way we've been doing it for the past 4 years," Loving Bobcat said simply, "by standing up for each other and standing up for justice. Like you, Squirrel." Loving Bobcat turned to his friend. "You've gotten so good at storing up nuts and berries to share with the animals who don't have enough food to eat." Squirrel nodded, his cheeks bulging with his latest stash of nuts. "And you, Bullfrog," Loving Bobcat continued, "you've gotten so good at leading us in your loud chants whenever we protest and march through the forest." Bullfrog puffed out his throat proudly. "And Chameleon," Loving Bobcat went on, "you've gotten so good at helping to hide our neighbors and keep them safe when they're in danger of being kicked out of the forest." He turned to look for Chameleon, but couldn't actually see her anywhere, so he went on. "And Parrot, you have such a way with words," said Loving Bobcat. "You've gotten so good at making impassioned arguments before the Forest Council to fight for our rights. With help from Woodpecker, too, poking holes in their lousy arguments." "Indeed, indeed, very true," squawked Parrot, bobbing their head. Woodpecker nodded vigorously in agreement, leaving some dents in a nearby tree trunk. "Just think about all we've learned in these last 4 years, Loving Bobcat continued, gazing around at all his forest friends. Each of you has your own unique talents, your own gifts to share as we work to make this forest the beautiful home it can be for the whole animal kingdom. As he gazed around at his forest friends, all nodding their agreement now, he felt a renewed sense of hope for the future. And he raised his head to the sky and called out a new chant that rang through the trees. Today is for singing and dancing and cheer, and to also declare that our work won't end here. And that is how Loving Bobcat and his friends finally brought an end to Mean Lion's reign and embarked on a new chapter in the story of the Great Forest. The end, but also just the beginning.
Thank you, Claire. One of the ways that we connect with each other as community is to share each other's joys and concerns. As we pause in a moment of quiet reflection, I invite you now to type any sorrows or concerns you are experiencing into the group chat box. We remember that 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. We're missing a friend who died suddenly last week. We remember a brother who has been diagnosed with COVID-19. Remembering a friend who had a mastectomy this week. A dear, nearly adopted daughter has also been diagnosed with COVID-19. We hold concern for the increased incidence of COVID throughout our community. And a concern about transition, the lame duck activities that will be occurring in Washington. And missing everyone, just missing life and all of it. Attended a funeral of a dear aunt on Friday via Zoom in gratitude for her long and fulfilling life. Doubts about whether family can visit for Thanksgiving. We hold these sorrows with tenderness and compassion. May they be lighter because they are shared. As a community, we also share our joys with one another. I invite you to type any joys you wish to share into the group chat box. We have joys for Claire's perfect story. Gratitude for a grandniece's negative COVID test result. The joy of picking apples recently and a new president on Tuesday. More joys for a Biden victory. Joys that mean old lion has been fired. That 988 mental health emergency hotline is now the law of the land. Gratitude for the ability to connect via technology. Joys for a niece who has recovered from COVID. Joy that a Black woman is going to be our new vice president. Gratitude for hard spiritual and emotional work and necessary communication. Joy that Cori Bush is my congresswoman and mine too. Much deepest gratitude to be praying for our president-elect for his strength and stamina. Relief and elation that democracy is messy, yet so resilient. A renewed hope that our nation can come together. And son and family visiting twice in a couple of weeks from now. Joys for a lovely outdoor cafe set up in the backyard so that we can celebrate with friends. We hold these joys with gladness and celebration. May they be magnified because they are shared. Now let us bring our spirits and hearts together in a healing time of prayer and meditation. Spirit of life, expanding universe of heart and mind, God of many names and no name, we call out to you this morning. In this season of decisions, the people cry out to you in hope and fear, in joy and longing, in expectation and dread. Our nation, our people, weary of holding our breath, prepare at last to release it into a great cleansing exhalation. How we have longed to release the tightness in our chests, untie the knots in our stomachs, to breathe in the crisp autumn air, letting it fill our souls with sunshine and new life. We long to take down our hands from our eyes, finally daring to peer out at the war-torn landscape. Our tired eyes searching to see what has survived the cataclysm. Was the cost too high? We have paid so dearly with divided states and towns, with deep alienation among neighbors, with divided hearts and families rent in two. Standing under a flawless blue sky, with the red blood pulsing through our veins, our hearts are bruised and purple, our spirits exhausted. O Spirit of life, O Star of truth, we call on you to remind us that ours is a religion that seeks in love to let go of false binaries. Let us retune our ears to hear your gentle call. Let us open our eyes to see that warfare and fear have held us hostage to false narratives of us versus them, of red versus blue, of love versus hate. May a spirit of love and peace lift us high above the flickering television maps of red and blue rectangles to see a more subtle reality, a sea of purple. Purple families, purple neighborhoods, even divided purple hearts beating in our own chests. May the bruised and purple hearts of this nation not be broken apart, but broken open. Open to the rich diversity that draws the human family toward new possibilities, into new life and new love. So may it be.
Our reading today is taken from Growing the Beloved Community, 12 Hallmarks of a Healthy Congregation by Tom Owen Toll. The sad reality is that Unitarian Universalists, blessed with an aching, ardent, prophetic conscience, are often stronger in our social justice outreach to outcasts in need than in personal inreach to the hurting in our own homes and churches. It's trickier to care up close than from afar. Church family members invariably stick around. Society's downtrodden eventually recede from direct view. Plus, it's usually more dramatic and satisfying to the ego to march for civil liberties or sign an initiative for reproductive rights than it is to drive a fellow parishioner to worship or take them a hot meal. Nevertheless, we must never forget that our own fellow churchgoers suffer regularly and greatly. We tend to think that Unitarian Universalists are fairly comfortable, sane, and self-reliant. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Any sampling of the humanity inhabiting our liberal religious homes reveals disruption, disease, and death. There isn't a member of any congregation who doesn't hold membership in the largest fellowship in the world, the communion of those who bear the mark of suffering and pain.
It is the mission of the First Unitarian Church of St. Louis to provide a hospitable sanctuary in this time and place for people to seek sources of spiritual strength and to encourage people in the church and in the world to work for love, decency, tolerance, and justice. In this time of pandemic, the church continues in that mission. The building is closed, but the church is open. We are not passing a physical plate, but there are many ways to donate, including by mail, online, or with our Text to Give program. These are uncertain times. Please give as you can.
Morning has broken like first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the world. Sweet the rains fall sunlight from heaven, like the first dew on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where his feet pass. Man is the sunlight, man is the morning, born of the one night, in some play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the day. Morning has broken like first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, restful in spring and fresh from the wood.
Our second reading today is from the book of Psalms, Psalm 25, verse 16 through 21. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart increase. Bring me out of my distress. See my affliction and my suffering, and take away all my iniquities. See my enemies, how many there are. They hate me with a violent hatred. Guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be ashamed, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me, for I wait for you.
It's trickier to care up close than from afar. Church members invariably stick around. Society's downtrodden eventually recede from direct view. The first reading suggests we already have an idea of what our congregations and their members are or should be like, and that we aren't used to think of our congregants as society's downtrodden. We aren't used to it. You hear it, right? A little dissonance from our first principle, a smidgen of that old UU elitism. Look, I don't mean to chastise. I have frequently fallen victim to elitism. I constantly have to check my privilege. But I'm here to tell you some news. It might even be good news. This is a story of what can happen when we realize we have downtrodden humans in the midst of our congregations. In my home congregation of Alton, we have had our share of congregants in need. Some of them are visible and some invisible. When we see them, or if we see them, we do our level best to help them, sometimes in clear and effective ways, but sometimes, and I don't know, maybe many times, maybe the majority of the times, we let people fall through the cracks. We too are human after all. In my experience, helping a fellow congregant in need is difficult, often uncomfortable, and never as rosy as advertised. And that is because you have to keep looking at them and at yourself. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart increase. Bring me out of my distress. These verses remind me of a person in my congregation. This congregant, I'm going to call him Bill, and that's not his real name, but we're here in this public broadcast. This congregant named Bill passed away this summer, and I think he might enjoy the thought that I'm writing a homily for him. Bill was persistent. I mean, when the announcement came that he had passed away earlier this year, I thought it must have been a mistake, because by golly, I thought he was immortal. He was as much a part of our church as the stained glass windows in our sanctuary, and just as fragile. Bill could advocate for himself, and that was what made us look at him. If you ask other congregants, you will certainly find a variety of opinions on what kind of need he was in. I mean, visibly and especially towards the end, he had mobility issues. But if you happen to be one of the people that over time gave him rides, you would know that the many housing situations he found himself in were all gray and drab and squalid. Also, I remember seeing him line up for lunch with the food insecure people when we had that program once a month, or later coming to collect some personal care items we distributed. And I also remember the clinking sound of the few coins he would regularly put in the offering basket. So, did he have money and didn't want to spend it? Why was he always looking for a handout? Did he really need lunch? Who knows? And frankly, who cares? Because from what I saw, he seemed lonely and alone and not living a comfortable life, not a life, again, that was pleasant to look at on a regular basis. And we all tried to help him. And in fact, he made us all come together. So the fact is that Bill's fixture-like nature in our church comes from all the many ways we try to help, though sometimes, or maybe even often, we may have been judgy or put upon about it. See my affliction and my suffering, and take away all my iniquities. Sometimes things don't become clear until you see these things from afar. Sometimes how you speak about someone reveals something you hadn't previously seen. The in memoriam blurb in our newsletter reads like this. Bill joined our congregation in 2005 after learning about the church from his sister. He hardly ever missed a Sunday service. He shared his poetry with those meeting in chalice circles or other small group settings and enjoyed playing chess with the young people. He always enjoyed a cup of coffee during fellowship time and appreciated the potluck lunches. Can you see it? Behind these words, do you see the effort and the help, the struggle of many people to literally lift up a life who vociferously advocated for himself against loneliness and towards community? You see the community, right? Difficult and worthy, judgy and humbling. Let me not be ashamed, for I take refuge in you. Bill, wherever you are right now, thank you for your service to the church. Amen, and blessed be.
I used to occasionally attend church in a denomination known as Unity. This was a church that blended some elements of Christianity with elements of modern New Thought spirituality. At the end of every service, we would sing a hymn that had these lyrics: "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, his or her children all are we. Let us walk with each other in peace and harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace and harmony. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we do well to desire justice and peace to prevail in the world. But with this broad image of universal justice prevailing, we can often forget that for justice to prevail, for there to be peace on earth, we must first act justly, and have peace in our congregations. If a homeless person or someone who's hungry walks into one of our congregations and we tell them to leave, how can we bring peace to a world that is homeless and hungry? And if we are doing theology without listening to the voices of those who are most marginalized by systems of oppression, how can we bring peace to a world with voices that are continually unheard? And if we can't get along with each other and care for each other's needs in our congregations, how can we put an end to all the war and oppression in the world? It's good to long for peace on earth, but unless it begins with us, right here, right now, it's just a pipe dream. The psalmist from today's second reading begs God to be gracious to him because he is lonely. And some of us in this congregation long for grace because we too are lonely. His heart is troubled and distressed, and he longs to be relieved. Some of us in this congregation are troubled and need comfort. He sees that he has committed iniquity and needs forgiveness. And there are those among us who feel guilt and want to be forgiven. In our tradition, we have a variety of beliefs about the existence of God. Some of us are theists, some of us are atheists, and some of us are agnostics. Regardless of what we believe about the existence of God, however, maybe the psalm is crying out to us to help alleviate the burdens people in our congregations are carrying. If there is a God, I imagine that God is calling us to join hands with her to answer the prayers of those among us who suffer. And if there isn't a God, then it is completely up to us to answer these cries for help. In either case, the psalm calls us to relieve the troubles of those in our congregations, to give grace to the lonely among us, and to forgive those among us who are burdened with guilt. When we have learned to create this justice and peace in our congregations, perhaps it is then that we will be able to create justice in the world at large.
Engaging in justice work is embedded in our Unitarian Universalist history. One could almost say it is part of our DNA if you can apply that concept to a group of people. To bring this down to a congregational level, we do help people in our own congregations. We have pastoral care and other committees to help. But I think there is some validity to our reading that we assume Unitarian Universalists are fairly comfortable, sane, and self-reliant. The recent Unitarian Universalist report, Widening the Circle of Concern, says that we are into individualism. The reading reminds us that we all have disruption, disease, and death in our lives, in your life, and in my life. I think more than believing that we are so well put together, there is another issue about why we sometimes don't reach out in our own congregations except through committees. Being involved in social justice means that we like to solve problems. We like to put things right. But there are times when we just cannot put things right. I remember in 2008 when there was an economic crash. People were losing well-paying jobs. There were no comparable jobs to go to. Even if they managed to get another job, their salary would be significantly cut. What could one say? Sorry is not enough. I believe that we don't reach out to our fellow congregants at times because there's nothing we think we can do. Not only can we not solve the problem, we don't know what to say. Sometimes we even feel ashamed because we cannot help, so we avoid the situation. I would like to offer a parallel to discussions about God that I've listened to in seminary. Now, I'm not asking people who don't believe in God to believe in God. That's not my point at all. Rather, I want to make an analogy to humans. The question often arises, if God is God, then why doesn't God do something about the evil in the world? I've heard that question answered in many ways. One answer is it's not God's role. It is the role of humans to rid the world of evil. Another answer makes more sense to me. It is that who we think God is wrong. We got the definition of God wrong. God is not the eternal problem solver. God is relationship. God is the one with us. God is present. I think we have the definition of humans wrong too. To put it more accurately, incomplete. We are more than problem solvers. In fact, one characteristic of white privilege is to believe that we can solve every problem. Rather, consider that our very presence counts. We don't have to fix the problem. Sometimes we can't fix the problem. We don't have to say the right words. Sometimes there are no right words to say. We just have to be present. And yes, in these times, virtually present. The person just needs to know we're there. Just being there changes us from problem solvers to healers. We can't make the wounds go away or even dress the wounds. Rather, we are the ones who, by our present, acknowledge that the wounds are there. Our presence says the person who is suffering is important, even though we can do nothing, even though there are no right words. That is healing. That is who we are as humans. We are healing presence.
We tend to think that Unitarian Universalists are fairly comfortable, sane, and self-reliant. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Comfortable, sane, and self-reliant. That's a very Emersonian view of Unitarian Universalists. And I gotta tell you, I always preferred the Elcotts. This view, though, that we've got our emotional, spiritual, and logistical stuff together so much so that we're going to go out and change the world. It's fiction. A pretty myth from pretty early on in our faith became mistaken for truth. It's added not only to our serious and systemic issues when it comes to classism in our denomination as a whole, but also to the rugged individualism that keeps us not only closed off from other UU congregations and communities around us, but sometimes from each other. I remember early on in my attending this church, I was sort of begrudgingly invited out to a post-service brunch with a group of folks to a local jazz club. It was their tradition, and I happened to be sitting with them at coffee hour as the plans were finalized, and I think they felt bad for me. I was suddenly panicked at the invitation, though, because I barely had enough money for bus fare back home. There was no way I was going to a jazz brunch. My mind spun. Am I supposed to have that kind of cash on hand to be in this community? To be a good minister? I better not let them know how poor I actually am, as if the rolled pennies and the nickels that I dropped in the offering plate didn't already give the game away. I was suddenly really uncomfortable, neurotic, and very aware of how precarious the sustainability of myself really was. That wouldn't be the last time I felt truly afraid here, though. The Tree of Life shooting 2 years ago this past week. I remember crying so hard on my way to church, trying to get rid of the red puffiness in my eyes before I found a pew that morning. I was just so angry and so scared. The El Paso Walmart shooting, a little over a year ago now. I was heartbroken and furious, but also terrified. I used to walk those aisles of that shop once a month practically. El Paso was the big, bright city to us small town desert folks. My friends and I would take trips to ELP together, a caravan of young, poor kids who needed cheap groceries, a Whataburger, maybe, we'd catch a movie. And it was shattered and bloodied by hatred. And I was so scared. Which is why when Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor were killed, later George Floyd, when the McCloskeys pulled their guns on protesters that included our own minister, my reaction was intense. I think back to the early summer at how hard I pushed some of my fellow congregants, at how vehement I was in unflinchingly addressing issues of oppression and injustice. And it wasn't just that I was angry. I was also really scared. And I think that's at the root of Psalm 25, why that piece of scripture cuts so close for me, crossing the boundaries of 3 millennia to read it like it was ripped from my own journal. I'm lonely and afflicted. See my enemies, how many there are? Let me not be ashamed, for I take refuge in you. I'll be honest, there were times before this pandemic hit when I thought about not being a part of this congregation anymore. I just didn't feel like I fit. I was maybe too financially insecure. I was maybe too politically radical. I was maybe too uncompromising, judgmental. I wasn't a good enough universalist. I realized I was just afraid to be open, honest, vulnerable, completely myself in a space in which the myth of having our shit together was ever present. This past 4 years, has been hard. It's been uncomfortable, maddening, and disavowed us of the notion of self-reliance. But if there is a silver lining to the chaos, to the pandemic, to this distance from one another physically, it's that it's forced us to become so much closer emotionally and spiritually. I love you all. I take refuge in you. I wait for the time when we can be together again. And I thank you for letting me be afraid in front of you, with you. I'm not ashamed of it anymore.
Please join us in our closing hymn, number 124, Be That Guide.
May we reach outward to ease suffering. May we reach inward to ease suffering. May we feel no shame if we are suffering to ask for support. May we feel no shame if we see suffering to give support, especially if that support is our presence, virtual presence. May we, as we go forward this week, seek to ease suffering both beyond and within our congregation.